We left off on lesson 1 discussing Adam and Eve and what I think they are, and how Adam is a analogy, or man in general is an analogy of a nation, a group of people, and a woman is a culture, oftentimes in the form of a religious system. Now, just to answer the question that you should be having right now is, in a book like the Bible, okay, Adam is this metaphor, but surely the rest of the people in the Bible are not metaphors. They're not all countries and civilizations, right? Well, imagine you're me. Imagine I would say every man, period, and every woman, period, is a metaphor of the people and the culture. So all women are usually a religion or a culture, and all the men are the groups of people that oftentimes we associate with a nation. Every single one. Let the questions start going. Yeah, but not. Yes, that one too. So now you can see why maybe I'm saying this is pretty different. Because we're, just talking about Adam and Eve, there's been a million ways of looking at that. We're going to go way off the rails in the most sensible way you can imagine. So, we left off with Adam being put to sleep, took a rib, united, created civilization. So what I want to do now is again, I told you these first 4 chapters are just packed in there. They're packing peanuts full. They are just jammed in there. So we have to kind of piece at a time. I want to look at chapter 3. This is where they're tempted by the serpent. So if we look at chapter 3, it begins with a statement. Now the serpent was more cunning than any beast of the field, again, that same phrase, which the Lord of the God had made. And he said to the woman, well, before we go on to the temptation itself, let's look at this phrase, the serpent was more cunning than any beast of the field. And then if we return to chapter 2, and I kind of said, put this in the back of your head, and how God had made a helper comparable to him, and he formed every beast of the field and every bird of the air, and he gave names to cattle, birds of the air, beasts of the field, right? So there was these animals referenced multiple times, and chapter 3 begins with a new animal reference in relation to the other animals. So what I think we have to do is realize that if I could reiterate any of my points, number 1, it's not literal. So we're not looking at a literal serpent/snake. We are looking for cattle, birds of the air, beasts of the field, and serpents. With the never-ending understanding that man and woman represent the two sides of civilization. So if religion and culture is a helper comparable to the people, but before that, there was other helpers created. We need to put on our civilization cap, our sociologist cap, our anthropologist cap, and kind of walk away from our pseudo-spiritual religious cap, because much of that is just, well, we'll get into that. So I'm going to go to a series of images that I have put together like before. Again, it's just intended to kind of help guide our discussions. So these two first slides are just standard, and there's dozens. If you go online and start looking for these like society pyramids, you'll find them for different ages and different groups and different, they'll have slightly different setups. I like these for a couple of reasons. These tend to kind of be more ancient and pseudo-Egyptian in timeline. But here's what I want you to see is all of these pyramidal structures that you'll come across. They're all pretty fat on the bottom and pretty sparse on the top. And as you go from the bottom to the top, the quote-unquote importance of the role goes up and the influence goes up with the number of people involved in that. So let's call this a caste system. So the number of people per caste diminishes until you get pretty close to one or just a handful on the top of almost all pyramids. So if we go back to chapter 2 and look again, and it says, formed every beast of the field, bird of the air, and there's also cattle kind of thrown in there. I'm going to say what those mean are, you're looking at some form of this. So we have cattle, beasts of the field, birds of the air, and your serpents are going to be right here. So this is a pretty bold claim that I believe is supported by, almost the entirety of the rest of the Bible. And we're going to get into all kinds of other things based on this, like circumcision, and a few other things. So the serpent, the merchant class. So let's stop right there, go back to the verse, take a look at the verse, and read it again in that light. And it says, now the serpent, the merchants, were more cunning than any of the other classes in that nation. And he said to the religion, only there's no religion yet, but he said to the woman, and he talked to the cultural leaders, and he said, did God really say you shall not eat of every tree in the garden? And we haven't talked about it yet, but God had specified, hey, here's 2 trees. You can have the tree of life, but please don't touch the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And the woman said to the serpent, We may eat the fruit of the trees of the garden, but the fruit of the tree which is in the midst of the garden, God has said, you shall not eat it, nor shall you touch it, lest you die. Then the serpent said to the woman, you will not die, for God knows that when you eat it, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil. So when the woman saw that the tree was good for food, and that it was pleasant to the eyes, and the tree, and a desirable tree to make one wise, she took of its fruit and ate, and she also gave to her husband with her, and he ate. Then in the eyes of both of them were opened, and they knew they were naked. And they sewed fig leaves together and made themselves coverings. Oh boy. That was like 7 verses. That's like 700 things that we have to cover. So, yeah, there is so much in that. That is, it seems innocent enough, right? They were tempted. Oftentimes people, I have heard an untold number of different, and quite frankly, not terrible explanations of what this could be. Loss of innocence, other things. And it's just, but again, the point of all this is I believe this storyteller was telling a specific story. And the clues are, they're everywhere. You just have to learn to pick them up. So let's just kind of peel back a few things about what I think is going on. So you got Adam and Eve with the river running through the garden, and they can eat any of the trees, just not the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And quite frankly, I've never heard a decent version of what the tree of knowledge of good and evil is, and I believe by the end of this, hopefully I'll have you convinced. This is just your old standard. Here's the serpent tempting Eve with the apple, because we've got to make it a real literal fruit. We can't see this for the metaphor that it is. Again, I wanted to make sure that I got the river in there, and you're going to see that real soon why that is. And here are the beasts, the creatures, right? So it's always the creatures and the snake in Eden with these naked people. All of them are unbelievably symbolic, but here we are literally looking at this nice painting. Let's start here. This is a snake, a serpent. This is a serpent. This is a serpent. This is a serpent. That is definitely a serpent. Because I didn't want this to be, it's not racially motivated. I'm not looking for anything. It's just, this is a good, I thought was a good stereotypical representation of like a shady looking merchant. Those are definitely a fat room of servants. Serpent. Right? So again, just like with the rib, I believe the author is telling you, please go look at a snake it'll make way more sense if you could see the snake when I'm telling you the story. So this image is gonna keep popping up. And I apologize for the goofy lines, but I really like the shape of this, and you'll see why. I started this premise with, hey, a serpent is a merchant. A merchant, right? And merchants have grown and grown in size and power, but one can almost simultaneously associate, and this goes back to lesson 1, the water with trade, commerce. I believe the word merchant is related to myrrh, which is Latin for the sea. So I believe it's even in the name. I need to look that up and show if that's true, but I'd be willing to bet that. Here's Venice, it looks like. Some more merchants. You don't specifically see the water, but you definitely see the boat in the background. Oh, maybe that is the water. The boat in the background, the casks that come off of the ship. Here is an ancient, I believe, Phoenician merchant vessel, right? They were known for being the merchants of their time. They were a seafaring culture, merchants. They bought and sold things. The Egyptians, who teamed up with the old Canaanite slash Phoenicians. So the serpent now can also be seen, like the rib, as a pretty nice symbolic representation of the river. And you know what's interesting, and I need to go find this Bible verse too, is one of the ways that Lucifer, Satan, has been described, at least that I've heard, is as like this being of light, this shiny one. And if we just look, you can almost see the light glimmering, shining, as the snake is slithering through the earth, providing the beautiful highway necessary for commerce, endless commerce. And like a snake, even the water system itself, from the tail snaking down into the open mouth, into the sea, where it then takes on salt and becomes a different thing. So the fresh water is still associated with knowledge, but it truly becomes associated with something more than just knowledge when you add this salt to it. And we'll get into what salt means and how salt is, in many ways, we'll call that an association with commerce, with trade. It's almost like the knowledge of making money is the sea. And that's where you start to get things like your beasts of the sea. You have these sea serpents, and they are much larger, and they take on a different meaning than just almost a one-for-one metaphor like this. A sea serpent starts to represent more of the concepts. And it's interesting how your sea serpents are almost always shown in relation to a passing ship of some kind. Serpents don't have to just be water. Commerce is not exclusively a water thing. There is merchants that are still snaking their way through other means. In this case, like the well-known camel caravans through the desert that brought goods. Oftentimes, those camel caravans were part of a larger movement of goods from one side of the world to the other in the Silk Road. That is kind of what this region did is they acted as middlemen from the east to the west. And that looks like a snake. And even who do the Chinese myths claim gave China its... Who formed China? Who gives the emperors their power? The dragon, right? The dragon gives the emperor his power. And if you just look, just again, I told you at the beginning, you need to be able to abstract your thoughts. You can almost see the tail go into this open mouth of the dragon, where it gets bigger and crazier. And if I found additional delta areas, you could see how this becomes the delta of the river spilling out into the ocean. Notice that's high, notice that's low, and notice the nice river-esqueness of the shape of the dragon. Serpents in trade have also facilitated in other similar shapes, but here's a railroad, right? This is almost more of a fire-breathing dragon. You've got the snake of commerce for today, where we've kind of given up on the railroads to some extent, and we've added this never-ending crisscross of highways, also almost exclusively for the purposes of commerce. In fact, I love this one because it's so many serpents in one location. I think there's a train and a road and a river, and we can even get into this energetic one here, right? Because you can also see the serpentine movement of electrical telephone poles that also follows similar features. Again, this is getting a little bit out there, but it's not, and we haven't gotten into the book of Revelation, and we won't for a while, but you will see the direct connection to water and electricity at some point. Direct connection. After all, how does electricity flow? Through current? Has resistance, like the resistance of a dam of the waters flowing. Like, electricity is taught in water terms, so it's not a stretch at all. This is way back in the mid 90s. They started talking about this information superhighway and how this digital revolution was going to connect us. Again, just more serpents, more commerce. New generation, old concepts. So I'm going to return to the story, and we're going to get into something that, we can't miss the importance of what's being said here. No, that's not what I said. The woman said to the serpent, and the serpent said to the woman, right? So we don't begin with the serpent coming to the people. The serpent attacks the culture, right? So the culture becomes undermined by the influences of the moneyed peoples. The money interests starts to tempt the priesthood, the bureaucratic classes that run a culture. They started getting tempted by money. And the serpent said, "What do you mean you can't eat of this tree? Of course you can eat this tree." And the woman said, no, we'll die. And he's like, you're not going to die. You're going to know good and evil. And she gave it, and the priest class gave this knowledge of good and evil to the people. So money and religion. In fact, let's just step back from that. Culture kind of turns in this, in my opinion, and I'll try to prove that, this bite is the creation of religion. So the original sin from the world's most famous religious text, as best as I could determine it, is actually telling you that the original sin is the creation of religion itself. How's that for crazy? So if we go back to my little slides here, money and God. Money and God. Opulence, power, priest class, money, and God. Even today, right? It's not just an old story, it's the story of religion. This man's name is Dollar. And I know you know him, so I'm not going to make fun of him. He's actually just one of many, many people. He's just a really good high-end example of what I'm talking about. How the religious teachings become so entwined with the affluence and wealth gathering that it almost just becomes synonymous. So let's go off on a wild tangent, right? I want to make what I would consider I'm going to sell my concept of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Because I'm going to be honest, up till today, nobody has made me happy. At least happy enough where I said, I don't need to look further. This is the answer I'm looking for. Strangely, not as many people know about what this is as I thought. There's quite a few. If you've ever listened to Randall Carlson or Graham Hancock or Joe Rogan, you've probably at least heard the term Göbekli Tepe. And that is this, we'll call it a temple complex. It's not quite a temple complex, and it is considered the oldest structure in the world. And there's a whole lot to it, and I recommend you go into all of this, but really go look into Göbekli Tepe. Besides the obvious tree that I'm looking at, and as much as I hate to be almost literal, don't sleep on things like that, because if there's one thing I've already tried to show you a couple of times, describing something as it looks visually is a really powerful tool. So what this was, and what you're looking at when you see these big T's, is on them are inscriptions, are these simple kind of animal shapes, these kind of strange, bizarre shapes. And the best they can figure, there begins to be these astrological connections, right? So it was probably initially built to do some form of celestial observation, and like many other things, such as Stonehenge, right? Stonehenge, without exception, is aligned to the solstices. In fact, many people show up both times of year to kind of watch these events. Your pyramids are aligned to numerous celestial, stellar objects. There's different theories on on like why this is not a straight line. All right, here's one that's saying it has something to do with the alignment of the stars or the planets. There's a fairly common one that people try to poo-poo, but it's pretty strong if you just look at it on its surface. Is this Orion's belt connection? I believe this is somewhere in Mexico or Central America. Speaking of which, and what I'm showing you here is religion and the sky are almost synonymous, and that's the connection. All of this, even from its earliest roots, right? The very first thing that we've ever built as a people, that story sounds familiar, was in fact based on stars. So even if you go to Mexico, you have this ridiculous pyramid on this amazing plateau or plaza. You have the pyramid of the sun, pyramid of the moon, and a pyramid of a serpent. No kidding. So the thing that gives this culture its power is yet another serpent. I wonder. Astrology seems to play an unbelievable role in many religions. These signs of the zodiac, even Christianity, and we'll get into that at some point. The names of our very planets are in fact gods. And not just of one culture, even though we kind of stick with a Greco-Roman god-naming thing. Even the days of the week, sun, moon, and stars. Sun, moon, and planets are the 7 days of the week. This is controversial. I'm not going down this road yet, but I just want you to see whether or not we like it or don't like it. There is something to the December 25th birth date of messianic figures. And this is not that speech. There's a day for that, and I'll show you why December 25th. And this would not be new. This is not something I've discovered. It's pretty easily accessible, but we'll get into that. So I made the joke about sevens the other day, but sevens are no joke. Sevens. And if you want to know why sevens, before we go down the road of sevens, that is why. Because it is 5 and 2. So unfortunately, whether you're comfortable with this or not, there is an esoteric nature to all of this that I actually don't believe the Bible is selling you, but in fact warning you of, but in ignorance of the thing, right? You've got to at least be aware of it. So 2 plus 5 is 7. So there was 5 visible planets in the past before you had the addition of telescopes to kind of help us see the other. Now it's 3: Neptune, Uranus, and what's the other? Well, it'll come to me. It's not Pluto. Pluto has been demoted. Because the Earth, right? So the Earth would be the 8th planet. So we don't count the Earth, but the other planets, not counting the 2 we can't see without a telescope, and then you have the sun and the moon. So your 7 is a celestial number. So when you see things in religion like the 7 spirits of God, and yet simultaneously in a whole nother religion you have things like the 7 chakras, the 7 deadly sins, there's 7 heavens, there's 7 hells, there's 7 colors on a rainbow, right? One could say that this is the knowledge of good and evil, or one could just go on a purely surface level, good and evil, right and wrong, God and the devil, religion. And I'd say that's probably a fairly common understanding of all of this. But I'm going to I'm going to go out on a big fat limb here and say the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Yeah, and on another level, one could say that when the woman gets corrupted by the money, they create religion, and religion then begins to enact rules and act like God and tell everybody what's right and wrong in order to benefit itself. And that's kind of what I'm saying, but I'm saying it from a slightly different, more nuanced way, I think, if we hold on for just a second. And this one took a second for me to really find the answer I'm looking for that ties it all together. But I'm pretty confident. So just, and this is where I think kind of forces you to stop and be like, it has to be religion, it has to be sin. Sin comes from knowing you're doing wrong or something like that. But I think it's a little more interesting. So let's just take the word good and evil. Just think about a thesaurus, about synonyms, antonyms. Like, what is also like good and evil? Here's just a quick search. Good and evil, right and wrong, yeah, black and white. But the one I really like, I really feel like it sums up almost every religion anyways, is this concept of light and dark. And how your religion is helping you overcome the dark, the sin, the evil, with all of these rules by these priests who are good and of the light and of God, right? That's kind of your standard selling point of a religion. But let's push this even further. Not just light and dark. Day and night. I even like this image because look at that cute little knowledge of good and evil tree. Good and evil. Light and dark. Day and night. And where do we get the knowledge of day and night? What is the knowledge of day and night? What's another way of looking at that? The stars, right? Astrology, initially, if you look at the stars, and one of the ways they're able to date certain things, like how do they get to the sky over Giza Plateau in 2500 BC? Because they know that there's a progression of the equinox, right? There's a progression. The sky is, at the very least, take all the mumbo jumbo out. The sky is a beautiful clock. The sun and the moon are wonderful clocks. We set our year and our months by the sky. We get our knowledge of light and dark, of the sun and the moon and the stars, through places like this, right? The priests set them up initially to help with planting, to help with understanding what time of year it was so that you can make preparations and build a better society. But ultimately, what ends up happening is you create entire religions full of power around 7 things in the sky. You following me? So the tree, and again, let's change this to day and night. So the knowledge of day and night. The original sin is to eat time. The concept of just a simple clock. You take that clock inside of you and you use that for power. Because you have power that the people don't. That is sin. Even This is your standard Freemasonic ledger that you would give to your first degree initiate, and they would say, hey, go study this so that you understand the secrets of the universe. And there's two pillars, Jachin and Boaz. One is male and one is female. One is represented with the sun and the moon and the stars, right? So again, even your things that are supposed to be above mere religion are nothing but mere astrology cranked to 11. Now, if we take our, well, let's hold off on that. So let's go back. Let's go back to Eve in the garden. Because I want you to really think about the story. Because so often the story is just, people just say words and they don't really think about how deep this goes. How deep it can go. How deep it should go. If it is the basis of all sin and the fallen nature of mankind, and every one of our lives is ruined from this simple story, we should spend a little time kind of figuring out where the mess is so we can undo it. And I think the Bible tells you, you gotta go into it. So, the serpent tempts the woman shares it with the man eats it too. They realize they're naked, and I think we're gonna save the nakedness for the next one when we get into God. But God realizes that they've done what they weren't supposed to do. Number one, God's walking around in the garden. That's another thing, like now this our God is walking around talking to Adam and Eve. Yeah, you should think on that before I talk about it. So the God, he starts to question everybody, and he's saying, hey, who told you to do this? And Adam said, well, the woman you gave me, she pulled this from the tree and made me eat it. And God said to the woman, why would you do that? And the woman said, oh, the serpent made me do it. And so then he begins these series of curses. But I love the blame game. So if you really just think about what we just said, God is mad at these three beings, and he says to the people, hey, why would you do this? And they said, well, the priest made us do it. And he said to the priest, well, why would you do that? And they're like, well, money. And so he begins to curse everybody, and he says, because you have done this, you are cursed more than the slaves, and you're cursed more than the farmers out in the field. On your belly you shall go, and you shall eat men, individual men. You shall eat dust, people, all the days of your life. And I will put like an endless fight between you and the priests, between you and her offspring, between your offspring and her offspring. So there will be an eternal struggle between money and religion. Even though there's a strange bedfellows, they're also like diametrically opposed, at least on a conceptual. But he who shall bruise your head, so he shall always attack the leaders, and you shall bruise his heel, meaning you will always be striking back on the lower levels, and he will be attacking your inner. That's how I'm reading it. It's like head would be the higher ups and the heel would be the lower down. So there's a checks and balances between religion and money. But then he turns and he curses religion, and he says, I will greatly multiply your sorrow and your conception. In pain you shall bring forth children. And that's huge, because how much oppression has been done to actual females when that has nothing to do with what the story is saying. The story is saying nothing will be more chaotic and murderous in the world than the advent of a new religion. And think of every religion as it comes online, it just has to tear an old religion down. So that couldn't be more true. So the childbirth is the act of a new religion coming forth, or even a new people that is created from an old religion. So either the male or the female. And that's how you will read the Bible from here on out. With me, that's how I will show you. And then the next one is your desire shall be for your husband. That again has nothing to do with you and your wife, in my understanding. That has everything to do with, no matter how powerful a religion gets, the people will ultimately run the show, right? So the people, the religion should always be about the people, and not the people about the religion. Your desire shall be for your husband, and he shall rule you. So the people will always rule the religion, in theory. And then to Adam, to the man, he said, because you have heeded the voice of this stupid religion, and you have eaten religion, you have eaten the knowledge of the stars as some kind of great spiritual, mystical wisdom. That's what it's saying. You ate astronomy. You consumed it as if it was real. And now you give it out to the people, right? Oh, Jesus. Cursed is the ground for your sake. In toil you shall eat of it all the days of your life. Both thorns and thistles it shall bring forth for you. And you shall eat herb of the field. In the sweat of your face shall eat bread, till you return to the ground. For out of it you were taken. For dust you are, and dust you shall return. It's saying, hey, every country, your mere existence is going to be one of, like, work, right? You can't have a nation and civilization without agriculture and basic necessities like roads and infrastructure and governments. And so there will just be this endless toil. And you shall eat bread. Bread, we haven't gotten into bread. Bread is another one that is synonymous with people. And when you die, when this country just falls apart ultimately, because all countries are doomed to fail, right? There's a life cycle of countries just like there's a life cycle of people. And you will just return back to individual people, and you will disintegrate, and then new countries will be formed out of the old people groups. Like, that is what his curse is. You are not going to live forever. This first nation of Adam is doomed for destruction, and it will be reassimilated into something else. And your wife will die with you, and she will be turned into a different religion, and that will morph into something else. And I'm going to hold off on this one other than this last part. Therefore, the Lord God sent him out of the garden of Eden to till the ground from which he was taken. So he drove out the man, and he placed cherubim at the east side of the Garden of Eden. And that's going to become pretty interesting, because we did sort of glaze over pretty significantly the 4 rivers of Eden. But notice this direction, because I believe, like man and like woman and like bread and wine and water and fire, all these things have a meaning. The east is so important. The east versus west dynamic. So notice that God didn't send them to the west. He sent them to the east. And interestingly, Eden was already described as in the east of the garden. So east of the east is where you will find this now corrupted religious civilization, which is very interesting when you put that on a map. So, to conclude lesson 2, the serpent is simultaneously rivers, merchants, and commerce. It's kind of this abstraction because they all sort of simultaneously mean the same thing. And one could argue that they are, without a river, it is difficult to have a civilization. But that river is a tricky little booger. Without money, it's really hard to have a flow of goods. But boy, with that money, that corruption just instantaneously explodes, and there will always be some people at the top and people at the bottom, and it's you can see how the serpent was the most cunning of the beasts, right? Farmers aren't gonna they're just gonna grow food or not grow food. But the sellers and the buyers. Whew. So that's one. 2 is the effect of money on culture is what creates religion instead of just pure culture. And to do that, they use the priestly knowledge of the sky, wrap that in eternal life and sin and shame and guilt, and they tie all your morality into this net of control called religion. So the snake and the woman then pass that down to the people, Adam, and at that point, God has no choice, ultimately, but to kick you out. And we're going to get to that in the next one. So, hope that kind of makes more sense now.